A ransom note arrives at the headquarters of one of the most powerful media organizations on the planet. And buried inside it is a detail about the interior of a missing woman's home that no journalist had published, that no police department had disclosed, that no federal agent had breathed a word about publicly. A detail so precise, so locked to a single location on a single night, that when FBI investigators read it, they didn't dismiss it. They couldn't, because whoever wrote that note had been somewhere they shouldn't have been, or they knew someone who had. The question was never about what the detail described. The question was always about who could possibly have known it. Because in the hours between when that woman was last seen alive and the moment she disappeared entirely, only a small number of people had been inside that house. And one of those people has not made a single public statement in over 31 days. Welcome back to Cold Case History. I am going to walk you through every detail of this case, the footage, the forensics, the suspect behavior, the DNA, and the digital evidence trail. If you are new here, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We cover every update on cases like this one the moment they break. And trust me, this one is not finished breaking yet. Let's begin at the beginning. Her name is Nancy Guthrie. She is 84 years old. She was born on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She built her life in the Tucson, Arizona area over more than 5 decades, raising 3 children in the desert heat and dry mountain air of the Southwest. Her daughter Savannah became one of the most recognized faces in American broadcast journalism, co-hosting NBC's Today Show and anchoring some of the biggest news moments of the last decade. Her daughter Annie remained close to home, settling in the Catalina foothills just outside Tucson, a short drive from where her mother lived. Her son Cameron flew F-16s for the United States military before retiring. Nancy lost her husband Charles in 1988 when he was just 49 years old, killed during a mining exploration trip in Mexico. She never remarried. She built something quieter, something deliberately her own. Nancy was not the kind of woman who needed looking after. She wore an Apple Watch every single day, a device synced to both her iPhone and her pacemaker, a lifeline disguised as a fitness tracker. Her property had a doorbell camera and floodlights positioned around the exterior. She attended Sunday church services online every single week without fail, a habit she had maintained since the pandemic first forced congregations off their pews. She was present, she was engaged, and she was consistent. Which is why, on the morning of Sunday, February 1st, when she didn't appear in the church livestream, the people who loved her immediately knew something was wrong. A friend from church called the family. Annie drove over to her mother's home in the Catalina foothills at around 11 in the morning and searched the property. There was no sign of Nancy anywhere. By noon, the family had called 911. And what law enforcement found inside that house when they arrived made the situation immediately clear. Nancy's phone was there. Her medication was there. Her Apple Watch was there. Her personal belongings, everything she would need, and everything she would never willingly leave without. All of it untouched. All of it sitting exactly where she had left it. Nancy Guthrie did not walk out of that house on her own. Whatever happened to her occurred somewhere between 9:50 in the evening on January 31st and the early hours of February 1st. And it did not happen by her choice. Before you go any further, do me a quick favor. Hit the like button right now, subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, and send this video to someone who needs to hear this story, because what comes next changes the entire shape of what you think you know about this case. Now let's get back into it. The Apple Watch sitting inside Nancy's home was not, on its own, unusual. People take their watches off at night. People charge their devices and leave them on a nightstand or a counter or a shelf. That is ordinary. What made the Apple Watch extraordinary, what elevated it from a forgotten accessory to the single most significant piece of evidence in this entire investigation, was not what it was. It was where it was. The specific location of that device inside Nancy Guthrie's home became the detail that cracked the ransom note open. On February 3rd, TMZ received an email. Inside it was a ransom note demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin, setting 2 deadlines, one on February 5th and one on February 9th, and stating that Nancy was frightened but alive and aware that the letter had been sent. The note also stated there would be no further communication. KLD News, a CBS affiliate based in Tucson, received a nearly identical letter around the same time. At least one other outlet received a version as well. And buried inside these notes, written with structured grammar and deliberate layering, were 2 details that had never appeared anywhere in public reporting. 2 details that no journalist had published, that no law enforcement agency had disclosed, and that no source had leaked. The first was the specific location of Nancy's Apple Watch inside her home. The second was the condition of a floodlight at her property. Harvey Levin, the founder of TMZ, appeared on CNN, on Fox News, and on multiple other broadcasts to describe what his team had received. He was careful. He was measured. But he was also direct. He described the letter as something that was not thrown together hastily. The grammar was clean. The structure was deliberate. The language was layered. And then he said something that stopped every investigator paying attention in their tracks. He said the note identified where the Apple Watch was located, and that it was not somewhere you would automatically assume it would be. He told CNN anchors directly that this particular detail, the placement of the watch, was the primary reason the FBI chose to take the note seriously rather than dismiss it as a hoax. FBI Special Agent in charge Heath Yana confirmed publicly that both details, the Apple Watch placement and the floodlight, were referenced inside the ransom note. He would not elaborate further. He said doing so would compromise the investigation. KLD anchor Mary Coleman, who personally read the version her station received, told viewers that the note contained information that pointed specifically to someone who had direct knowledge of what happened inside that house. Not general knowledge. Not guesswork. The kind of information that only comes from being there. So now let's reconstruct the night of January 31st the way investigators would. Let's go minute by minute. According to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, Nancy Guthrie left her home that evening via Uber at 5:32 in the afternoon, traveling to Annie and Tommaso Caione's home for dinner and a game night with family. Hours passed. At some point in the late evening, Tommaso drove Nancy back to her house. The garage door at Nancy's property opened at 9:48 in the evening and closed again at 9:50. 2 minutes. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed to the New York Times that Tommaso personally drove Nancy home that night and that he ensured she was safely inside before he left. Read that again carefully. Safely inside. Not dropped at the curb. Not watched from a car window. Safely inside. That is a phrase that carries weight. That is a phrase that tells you Tommaso Caione was either physically inside that home or close enough to verify that Nancy had entered, settled, and was secure before he departed. Now, here is what the surveillance and sensor data tells us happened after that. At 1:47 in the morning, Nancy's doorbell camera went offline. FBI Director Kash Patel confirmed later that a masked, armed individual had approached the camera, first making contact with it lightly, then using foliage from a potted plant to obscure the lens. The footage was recovered. At 2:12 in the morning, the home's security system registered movement, but recorded no video. Nancy had not paid for a subscription that would have activated continuous recording. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker app disconnected simultaneously from her iPhone and her Apple Watch. Investigators believe that is the precise moment she was physically removed from the house, which means between 9:50 in the evening and 2:28 in the morning, there are 4 hours and 38 minutes that remain entirely unaccounted for. In that window, a masked man who appeared to know exactly where the doorbell camera was positioned showed up at the property, and Nancy was taken. The question that has driven this investigation ever since is deceptively simple. Between Tommaso leaving that house and the masked man arriving at it, who else went inside? Because whoever wrote that ransom note had been inside that house or had spoken to someone who had. Let's walk through the possibilities one by one. Nancy herself knew where her Apple Watch was. She placed it wherever she placed it that night. But Nancy did not write the ransom note. She was taken. Annie Guthrie had dinner with her mother earlier in the evening, but rode home with Tommaso when he drove Nancy back. There is no confirmation that Annie entered Nancy's home that night at all. Tommaso Caione drove Nancy home, walked her inside, and confirmed she was safely in. He was physically present in that house at approximately 9:48 to 9:50 in the evening. He would have been in that space while Nancy was setting down her belongings, taking off her watch, settling in for the night. He was there. And then there is the kidnapper, whoever entered that property between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. It is possible, technically, that an intruder who spent time inside that dark house during those 41 minutes came across the Apple Watch in its unusual location. But here's the problem with that theory. If the watch was somewhere you wouldn't naturally think to look, would a masked intruder under time pressure, in the dark, wearing gloves, actually stop to notice it and remember it precisely enough to include its location in a carefully drafted ransom letter sent hours later? Or did the person who wrote that note already know where it was before they even arrived? No one has been charged. No one has been officially named a suspect. Sheriff Nanos has publicly and emphatically stated that the family has been cleared, but the note knew where the watch was, and the watch was inside the home. And on the night of January 31st, the confirmed individuals inside that home can be counted on one hand. It is important to be absolutely clear here. Being present in someone's home is not evidence of wrongdoing. Tommaso Caione has not been charged with any crime. He has not been identified as a suspect by law enforcement. Sheriff Nanos has stated plainly and repeatedly that not one member of the Guthrie family is a suspect, that the family was cooperative from the very beginning, and that they were cleared within the first few days of the investigation. What we are doing here is mapping a timeline, not drawing conclusions. Facts are facts, access is access, and patterns are patterns. If you're still here, subscribe, because cases like this only work when people stay and tell us where you're watching from. I love seeing my global family represent. Drop your country or city in the comments. Now, the second detail inside the ransom note was the broken floodlight. Fox News, through a combination of drone footage and on-the-ground reporting, confirmed what federal agents would only partially acknowledge. 2 floodlights at the rear of Nancy's property were found broken, hanging from their fixtures by wiring alone. 2 other lights, one at the front of the property and one at the rear, appeared to be working. The FBI confirmed the floodlight was referenced in the ransom note. They said nothing more about it publicly. Now think about the geometry of that evening. If Tommaso drove Nancy home and entered through the garage, he would have approached the property from the driveway. Depending on the lighting conditions along that route, depending on where those broken lights were positioned relative to the path he walked, he could have seen them. He may have noticed the darkened zones around the back of the house. A person who was planning something against this property would also note broken floodlights immediately. Darkness is access. Darkness is cover. Darkness is exactly what someone surveilling a target would be mapping in advance. But here is what makes the overlap matter. Tommaso was at that property on the night of January 31st. The ransom note writer knew about the floodlights. Both details, the Apple Watch location and the broken lights, are the kind of things you only know if you were physically there. Both were confirmed by the FBI to be in the note. Neither had been reported publicly before the note surfaced. Again, this is not an accusation. This is a description of access. And the investigation has not told the public who, beyond the masked suspect, had that access that night. As of the time this video was recorded, Tommaso Cioni has not given a single public interview. He has not released a written statement. He has not appeared on camera to speak about his mother-in-law's disappearance. He has not posted anything on social media. He has not issued a plea to whoever is holding Nancy. Not one word in over 30 days. And that silence lands differently when you set it alongside what the rest of the family has done. Annie appeared on camera alongside Savannah in multiple public appeals. Cameron, Nancy's son, made direct on-camera statements to whoever is holding their mother, saying plainly that the family wants to hear from them. Savannah has posted to Instagram consistently throughout, has announced a $1 million reward for information leading to her mother's recovery, donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and walked away from co-hosting the 2026 Winter Olympics on NBC to remain in Tucson and search for Nancy. Even Luke Daly, a man who was detained by law enforcement in connection with this case, questioned, and then released, sat down for an on-camera interview within days of his release. Tommaso has said nothing. He was photographed by the Daily Mail, leaving his home with Annie on February 3rd. After that, he was absent from public view for weeks. He reappeared on March 2nd in footage captured by News Nation, walking arm in arm with Savannah and Annie to a memorial gathering outside Nancy's home. He placed yellow flowers. He did not speak to any cameras. Silence is not evidence of guilt. People move through grief in different ways. Legal counsel routinely advises clients not to speak publicly during active investigations, and following that advice is a person's right. But silence from the last confirmed person to see Nancy Guthrie alive, from the person who was inside her home hours before she vanished, while every other member of the family found their way in front of a camera, is the kind of silence that people notice. It has not gone unobserved. Now let's look at the remaining pieces of evidence that have emerged and line them up without drawing premature conclusions. Annie's car was seized by investigators under what the Pima County Sheriff's Department described as standard investigative practice. It has not been returned. That is notable because Luke Daly's Range Rover was processed and given back to him weeks ago. When reporter Brianna Whitney pressed the Sheriff's Department specifically about the status of Annie's vehicle, the response was that it remains part of the active investigation. The home Annie and Tommaso share has been searched multiple times. Investigators have spent hours inside photographing the interior and removing items. FBI agents have been canvassing the couple's neighbors, asking questions about them specifically. Megyn Kelly questioned publicly why investigators kept returning to that address. Ashley Banfield, on her podcast Drop Dead Serious, reported that a law enforcement source had described Tommaso as a prime suspect in the investigation. The Sheriff's Department pushed back hard, calling the characterization reckless. But Banfield has not walked it back. She told Dan Abrams on SiriusXM that her source has stood by the reporting every single day since it was published. She also pointed out that several other elements of her reporting, including the seizure of the vehicle and the tampering with cameras at the property, have since been independently confirmed by other outlets. Sheriff Nanos, for his part, has been unambiguous. On February 16th, he stood before reporters and said that not one single person in the family is a suspect, that they were cleared in the earliest days of the investigation, that they have been 100% cooperative, and that journalists and commentators needed to stop targeting the family publicly. He said, in his own words, that the family are victims and that he was saying plainly that they are clear. DNA recovered from a glove found near Nancy's property did not match any member of the Guthrie family. That glove and its DNA were sent to a laboratory in Florida for advanced genetic genealogy analysis. Results from that kind of testing can take months. In some cases, years. The masked individual captured on the doorbell footage before the camera was disabled has been described by investigators as approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with a medium build, carrying a black backpack identified as an Ozark Trail 25-liter hiking pack, and in possession of a weapon. Multiple sources have reported that Tommaso Cioni is significantly taller than that physical description. As of March 3rd, Sheriff Nanos told NBC News that his investigators are closer to answers than they have ever been, that he has full confidence the case will be solved, and that he personally believes Nancy Guthrie is alive. More than 21,000 tips have been received. The FBI has relocated its command center from Tucson to Phoenix as the investigation shifts into an analytical phase, while maintaining active resources on the ground in the Tucson area. There are two ways to interpret everything that has been laid out here, and both of them deserve to be taken seriously. The first reading is that Tommaso Cioni is the connective thread. He was physically inside Nancy's home on the night she disappeared. He was positioned to observe where she placed her Apple Watch. He would have had visibility on the floodlight situation as he approached and entered the property. The ransom note, written with careful grammar and insider detail, described both of those things accurately. His silence, the repeated searches of his home, the unreturned vehicle, the law enforcement source who described him as a prime suspect and has not backed down from that characterization even after the sheriff's denial. All of it forms a pattern of access and circumstance that has not been explained away. The Apple Watch detail is the thread, and the thread runs directly back to whoever was inside that house. On January 31st, Tommaso Cioni was inside that house. The second reading is that Tommaso is entirely irrelevant to the Apple Watch. The masked intruder entered the property between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. 41 minutes is time enough to move through a house. If the Apple Watch was somewhere unusual but visible, someone who spent that much time inside could have seen it. The broken floodlights were visible from the exterior of the property. The ransom note was composed by the kidnapper based on direct first-hand observation during the abduction itself, not from prior knowledge passed along by a third party. Tommaso's presence in the home earlier that evening is coincidental. His silence is the behavior of a man who has been advised by legal counsel to say nothing publicly, not the behavior of someone with something to hide. The family has been cleared. The DNA from the glove does not match. Tommaso's height does not match the suspect on the footage. The Apple Watch does not point to him. The Apple Watch does not choose a theory, but it narrows the universe of people who could have known where it was. And on the night of January 31st, the confirmed people inside that house are a very short list. Tommaso Cioni is on it. No charges have been filed. No one has been named a suspect. The sheriff has cleared the family with force and with consistency. But the ransom note knew where Nancy's Apple Watch was. A detail specific enough, precise enough, that the FBI treated the entire letter as credible because of it. That detail came from someone who was inside the house, or from the person who took her from it. And the last person confirmed to have been inside that house before Nancy Guthrie vanished is Tommaso Cioni. That is not an accusation. That is a timeline. And a timeline does not bend to suit anyone's preferred conclusion. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She has a pacemaker. She requires daily medication. She has been missing for over 30 days. Her daughter Savannah gave up the Olympics for her. Her family offered $1 million for her safe return. And somewhere in this country, someone knows exactly what happened to her. If you have any information at all, any detail that feels small or insignificant, call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Right now, today, because Nancy is still out there and she is running out of time. And if this case is sitting with you the way it is sitting with us, then do not let it fade. Subscribe to Cold Case History right now so you never miss a single update the moment it breaks. Hit the like button because it tells the algorithm this story matters and it keeps Nancy's name in front of more eyes. Share this video with everyone you know because the more people who know her name, the harder it becomes for whoever did this to stay hidden. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Because this community is global and Nancy's story deserves every corner of it. We are going to keep following this case. We are going to keep pulling the thread, asking the questions that nobody else will sit still long enough to ask, and showing up every single time something breaks. This is not over. Nancy Guthrie is not forgotten, and we are not going anywhere until she comes home.